We call this segment simply Capitol Spotlight. We take 5 minutes, we put the spotlight on a member of the General Assembly and discuss some of the things they've been working on and its impact on all of us here in the state of Rhode Island. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome back a gentleman we've talked to many times, the Honorable State Representative Greg Amore. Representative, good to see you.
Dave, nice to see you. Glad to be here.
And I know you and your colleagues in the House have been very busy. You have a bill that deals with Common Core standards, something called Common Core standards. First of all, set the stage for our viewers. Tell us about that and what's important about that legislation.
The Common Core standards were adopted by 48 states, mostly associated with the Race to the Top funding. And the idea is to have a common core of standards across the nation so that all students are career and college ready. Most of these states adopted these standards sight unseen, and they've adopted the testing that goes along with them sight unseen. And what we've seen in both New York and Kentucky, where the Common Core standards were implemented before they were in Rhode Island, and where they've used the testing associated with it, is that there's been disastrous results for educators, for parents, for students. And what my legislation does is it calls for a study of the Common Core standards to answer some really key questions that those stakeholders that I mentioned before have about the standards that really haven't been answered yet. And the process for adopting the Common Core was not public, it was not transparent. So what my bill does is it doesn't say the Common Core standards are good or bad. I have opinions, but it says let's take a look and answer the questions that are popping up all over the country. And while we're doing that, let's delay the testing associated with it, which would be high stakes for graduates and would be connected to teacher evaluation. Let's delay that until we know what we're getting into, we know what the test looks like, and we see what the results were in Kentucky and New York and where we could maybe improve or adjust.
Well, I remember we covered a public hearing that dealt with this question a few months ago.
Right.
And you mentioned you want to study this, you have your feelings about it. Obviously, you know a little something about this particular category. I remember at that public forum, almost everyone was upset about it, from teachers to administrators to parents to even students. There doesn't seem to be a lot of love for this graduation testing and these Common Core standards that your legislation will address.
Well, I think the intent to all of this is good, and I think we want high standards and we want rigorous curriculum and we want good classroom instruction. I think the question is that most of this is untested, unproven, has no track record. So the FDA would never approve a drug without a pilot test, without a track record. And we basically approve the Common Core standards and the testing associated without a proven track record, without testing it out. I watched the 60 Minutes piece a couple of weeks ago on the F-35 fighter, and the Pentagon official said, we need to fly before we buy. And he said that, that's acquisition malpractice. Well, I think this is the same thing. It's acquisition malpractice. We have acquired this testing, acquired these standards, and we really don't know what they're going to produce. What we do know is the countries that are supposedly the high-performing countries, and we can have a debate about that. In Finland, for instance, there are no standards. All right, it's an entirely different setup.
And yet their kids do pretty good.
They do extremely well. So we could spend a whole conversation on that. But what we're looking for is really to dive into what these standards are, how they're applied. There's a serious concern about the age or developmental appropriateness of the early standards, the K-3 standards. There's concerns about data. There's concerns about the cost to our district. So these are the questions that this task force would be answering, and we delay that PARC testing until we got those answers.
Representative, one other issue I want to talk with you about concerns some legislation you've been working on that would prohibit people that are convicted of domestic violence from purchasing a gun. Where does that legislation now stand?
So we have the felony conviction already. This would be a misdemeanor domestic violence crime conviction. And there's a federal law dealing with that, but it deals with the use or the intent of use of force. This would expand that. So it would cover cyber stalking. It would cover obstruction of a telephone. It would cover vandalism, simple assault, violation of restraining order. And it wouldn't allow somebody who was convicted under those misdemeanor domestic assault charges to purchase or possess a weapon. And one of the legitimate arguments that Second Amendment proponents have is that we keep trying to take guns out of law-abiding citizens' hands. Well, this bill does not do that. This takes guns out of people's hands who have proven themselves to be domestic assault violators.
And as a criminal justice major in college, I know how many homicides happened that were put in the category of passion crimes. People in the heat of passion, that domestic argument escalating and getting out of hand. You know, the overwhelming majority of people knowing the decedent that were involved in perpetrating a murder. You know, how do you feel about the legislation? Do you think you'll have the votes?
It was part of the original weapons package last year, a small part of it. It didn't move to the floor last year. I think this is a topic that people can agree on. And look, domestic assault does not have a demographic or a profile. All ages, all races, all income levels, both genders. So this is something that common sense-wise keeps weapons, at least purchased legally, out of the hands of those who have proven themselves to be domestic assault violators.
Representative Amore, thank you so much for talking to us. My best to you and your colleagues for the remainder of session.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
And of course, we could not do it without you. Thank you so very much for watching for Capitol Television and Capitol Spotlight. I'm Dave Barber.